Hi everyone, my name is Nicola, the founder of Resourcevol. In this video, I'll be talking about something that's really important for any organisation working with volunteers, how we describe the amazing volunteer opportunities we have on offer. The inspiration for this video came from a recent episode of the Volunteer Nation podcast hosted by Tobi Johnson, which is such a great podcast. I definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't already. I'll add a link down in the video description. So in episode number 157, which is called Fresh Take on Volunteer Position Descriptions, Tobi talks about how we tend to approach creating volunteer position descriptions in a similar way to how HR creates job descriptions for paid employees. So they're often quite boring, full of really dry language, unnecessary details, and often quite unrealistic lists of requirements. And in many cases, they're probably putting people off volunteering, which is exactly the opposite of what we want. So Tobi suggests revamping position descriptions so they work better to meet the informational and emotional needs of potential volunteers when they're considering a role and trying to figure out if it's right for them and if the organisation is a good fit for them. If you want to learn more about the different informational and emotional needs, what they are, and just kind of get some more general background information on this subject and why it's so important, I would definitely encourage you to listen to the full podcast episode. It's really interesting. But in this video, I'm focusing on Tobi's specific tips for improving the language and content of volunteer position descriptions. So I've drafted 2 template volunteer position descriptions applying 10 of Tobi's ideas. And the aim with this was to create documents that are informative and inspiring, and also that act as marketing tools to attract the right volunteers. So in terms of design, they're deliberately quite far away from the standard A4 text-based document that you might be familiar with. Let's take a look at the first template. This is for a community cook-up assistant volunteer role with a fictional organisation called Table Together. And the first element that I've addressed here is the title. So instead of calling documents like these volunteer position descriptions or role descriptions, both of which sound quite formal and a bit boring, call them volunteer opportunities instead. It might seem like a small change, but the word opportunity does feel much more inviting and active. So you'll see here on the first page of this template, in the top left, is the name of the organisation, Table Together, next to the logo, and then a hyphen, and it says volunteer opportunity. The main text says, join us as a community cook-up assistant, and underneath that in smaller text, no experience needed. The second thing you can look at is, instead of stating the goals for the role, focus on the impact of the role, and crucially include examples of what other volunteers have done and achieved through the role, because that immediately shows prospective volunteers the real-world difference they can make and why the role is important. So in the template, I have literally titled this page Impact, and the first paragraph in bold says, volunteers at Table Together don't just prepare meals, they help create spaces where neighbours connect, laugh, and feel seen. So it really is pulling in that idea that it's not just about the activities that volunteers do during the volunteer shifts, it's about the wider picture. And the rest of the text goes on to reinforce that point, including a quote from a volunteer. So it says, one volunteer, Sam, recently told us, quote, I thought I was just coming to chop veg, but I ended up helping a regular guest get back into cooking after losing her partner. She now volunteers with us too, end quote. Including volunteer voices like this is actually the third way that we can look at improving volunteer position descriptions. So instead of creating a purely bureaucratic document with no volunteer input, if you include quotes from people who have held the role, that will help to add some warmth and make it more relatable. And this second example of a volunteer quote actually takes up one entire page of the document, which is deliberate because I think that this helps to emphasize the importance of the volunteer voice when it comes to position descriptions. And quotes can also be in the form of volunteer tips or advice for newcomers, which is a practical bonus and a kind of different angle on the volunteer voice. The fourth element that I looked at was about community. So many organisations include their full mission statement or aims or objectives in their volunteer position descriptions. But Tobi suggested including something like a commitment to community statement instead, where you explain your organisation's rationale for engaging volunteers over paid staff, for example. So kind of highlighting the unique value that volunteers add and linking this back to the impact on the community. This page of the template is completely dedicated to community. So the title is Our Commitment to Community. The subtitle, We Believe in Doing Things with Our Community, not just for it. And then it goes on to explain more about why volunteers are important to this organisation. And I'll just read it out so that you get an idea of the kind of thing that you could maybe include in your position descriptions. So it says, our weekly cook-ups are powered by volunteers from the local community because this isn't just about feeding people, it's about building trust and belonging. Volunteers bring diverse skills, lived experience, and a spirit of generosity that can't be replicated by paid roles alone. When neighbours roll up their sleeves together, great things happen. So this is one example of the kind of commitment to community statement that Tobi was talking about, but it would probably need to be tailored to the specific circumstances of your organisation. The fifth area to look at is about values. So instead of listing policies or rules in your volunteer position descriptions, include information about the core beliefs or values that your organisation holds, because people are more likely to process and engage with content like this, and it also helps them to decide whether their approach is aligned with your organisation or not. Of course, it's important to cover policies and procedures, but this can be done during the more detailed onboarding or induction process later on within your organisation. So this page of the template is titled Our Team Values. The subtitle is At Table Together, our volunteers and staff share these core values, and then it lists 4 core values with a little bit of text explaining each one. The sixth area to look at is about volunteer tasks or responsibilities. So we usually have a section in our position descriptions solely listing tasks or responsibilities. And if we change the title of this section to something like what you will achieve or how you'll make a difference, then that means that you're going to be emphasizing the outcomes and the contributions rather than just the activities. So the example that I've got in the template here, the page is titled What You'll Do and Achieve, with a kind of subtitle off to the right which says supported by a friendly team leader and fellow volunteers, as a kind of reassurance to the volunteer that they won't be doing this on their own. Then listed underneath are 5 different examples of tasks, which are fairly standard, but I have tried to put a bit of a twist on some of them to show more about what will be achieved through the task. So instead of just saying set up tables, I've extended that a bit by saying set up tables and create a welcoming, homely vibe. And then similarly, instead of just saying chat with guests and help everyone feel included. So in this way, we're trying to emphasize what will be achieved through the task, as well as showing what the task will be. And then underneath the tasks is another volunteer quote, just so that we're making sure to keep that volunteer voice strong throughout the document. The 7th area to consider is reframing training requirements as things that volunteers can learn from the role, because if we do this, then it positions training as a benefit, not just something that needs to be done and gotten out of the way so that volunteering can start. And it also highlights skill development and growth. This page of the template is titled What You Can Learn, with a subtitle to the left which says full training provided, plus opportunities to try different volunteer roles. So trying to reassure the volunteer that they're not going to be thrown in at the deep end, and also really emphasizing the excitement about the fact that, there's stuff to learn, there are more opportunities in the future in case that might be something that you're interested in, and so on. So underneath the title, there are 5 examples of different things that can be learned through this role. Underneath those examples, I've popped another volunteer quote, just to make sure that that volunteer voice is ever present throughout the document. But also this one's a kind of targeted quote for any volunteers who might be worried that they don't have the necessary skills or experience to carry out the role. So the quote says, "At first, I worried I'd get in the way, but everyone was so down to earth. I learned how to chop veg properly and ended up running the salad station." This leads quite nicely into the 8th area that we can look at, which is qualifications and experience. So instead of just listing the required qualifications or experience for a particular volunteer role, which is very employee-centric, you can start with a title such as people who are successful in this role, ... or people who enjoy this role, ... And then underneath you can still list the necessary abilities, but it should be less about a rigid checklist and more about describing the characteristics and skills that would help someone thrive in that particular volunteer role. So the framing becomes more volunteer-centric. And the example page I have here in the template is titled People Who Enjoy This Role, ... with 5 bullet points listed underneath, which I will read out. So people who enjoy this role like doing hands-on work and being part of a team, are non-judgmental, open and friendly, are happy to get stuck in, whether it's peeling veg or pouring tea, enjoy being around people and having a chat, are open to learning and trying new things. From here we move on to area number 9, which is about the practical stuff. So it's important to include practical information like when and where the volunteering will take place, and also what the next steps are if someone is interested in volunteering. I think it's useful to have this all on one page if possible, without making it look too squished, because then it's easy to refer back to. The 10th and final area to look at is also included on this page, and that is contact details. Instead of generic contact details, try to include a real person or people. We might choose not to do this because it takes extra time and effort to update the document when roles change, for example, but it does make a big difference to someone considering whether to take the next step. And it also can be good encouragement for us to regularly review and refresh our volunteer opportunities. So it is worthwhile doing if you can. That was the first template. We took quite a detailed look at all 10 of the key elements that can help make volunteer position descriptions more volunteer-centric. Now we can take a quicker look at the second template just to help reinforce those ideas and show how they can work in a bit of a different context. This example is for an exhibition host volunteer opportunity with a fictional organisation called Open Gallery. Area number 1 is about the title, calling the document a volunteer opportunity instead of a position description or a role description, and in this template the words volunteer opportunity are much bigger, bolder, part of the main title. Area 2 is about focusing on the impact of the role, and again in this template there is an entire page dedicated to this, and I think in the third paragraph on this page there are some really good examples of things that previous volunteers have achieved. So it says exhibition hosts have helped first-time visitors discover new local artists, encouraged school groups to engage with visual storytelling, and sparked conversations that continued long after the gallery visit. Area 3 is about including volunteer voices, and in this template, again, there is a whole page dedicated to a volunteer quote, and further quotes can be found scattered throughout the document. Area 4 was about community, including that kind of statement on your commitment to community, and this template gives us another example of what that might look like. Area number 5 is subbing those policies and rules for more relatable values, and in this template the title on this page is Team Values, and there are 3 different values listed with a short explanation for each. And then there's a paragraph underneath which makes it clear that this organisation is looking for people who share these values, and also emphasises the team aspect of it. So the paragraph says, if these feel like your values too, we'd love to have you involved. Whether you join us for a few hours or a full exhibition season, you'll be part of a team that uplifts artists and visitors alike, no art degree needed. Area number 6 is about trying to emphasise the outcomes and contributions of volunteers rather than just the tasks or responsibilities of a particular role. So for this template page, the title is How You'll Make a Difference, with 4 relevant bullet points. And underneath that, there is actually another quote from a volunteer, and this one is a volunteer tip for someone who might be new to the volunteer role. So it says, quote, "Don't worry about saying something clever, just ask people what they think. Starting a conversation is more important than knowing all the facts," end quote. Area number 7 is about reframing training requirements as things that volunteers can learn from the role, so positioning that training as a benefit. And this page of the template is titled What You Can Learn, with 4 bullet point examples. And there is actually another volunteer quote underneath as well, which emphasises the learning that can be gained from the role. So the quote says, I started volunteering during my gap year. Now I'm applying to study museum curation, and this role gave me loads to talk about in my interview. Area number 8 is about switching out those rigid checklists of qualifications or experience required for a more gentle approach of characteristics and skills that help someone thrive in the volunteer role. The title for this page of the template is People Who Love This Role, and then there are 3 bullet-pointed examples. Area number 9 is about including that important practical information, the when, the where, the next steps. And again, with this template, I've made sure that it's all on one page. And finally, area 10, contact details. With this template, you can see an example of what that might look like if you don't have one specific person that can be contacted about the volunteer role, but instead you have a team that might be responsible for handling queries. So those were my versions of Tobi Johnson's fresh take on volunteer position descriptions. There's always room to improve, but I do feel like they're a good starting point, and I'm going to pop links to both of the templates in the video description below so that you can access them for free. Tobi was very much encouraging everyone to experiment and test these new approaches, so please do feel free to adapt the templates, add your own twist, and also share them with other volunteer engagement professionals. I'm excited to see how volunteer opportunities evolve and the positive impact this could have on volunteer recruitment. So if you create something that gets great results, I would love to hear about it. Otherwise, thanks for watching this video. Make sure to check out my website, resourcevol.com, for more free content, and subscribe to this YouTube channel so you don't miss out on future videos. See you next time.